All right, so let's start. Last time we started with class or OOP in JavaScript, and we're able to talk about how you can create a class. And after that, we talked about the constructor, which is a special function that get called anytime you are creating objects or anytime you are instantiating an object from a class. There. So this function is going to get called, and that function is what we call the constructor, which is going to construct the object based on the structure that you given that is given to your class there. And apart from that, we talk about member variables. We talked about methods, getter and setter, and again we talked about the private variables and method. So today I'm going to start from this inheritance and polymorphism here because they are very important. I'm skipping this number 7, which is something I'm going to explain last there. So I'm going to move it down to this side so that it can turn to the 8th item on the list. So we're going to continue from this inheritance. And what is inheritance? Inheritance is really useful anytime you are dealing with multiple classes, and some of these classes actually have some properties in common, or they have some functionality in common there. For example, here we have this class user, which is just a single user. So once you have a single class, you don't really need anything like inheritance or polymorphism there. So you don't need them because it only work with 2 or more classes there. And when is it going to be useful? It will always be useful anytime you have 2 class or more than 2 class or 3 class that needs to share the same functionality. For example, here I want to have a class for account here, and this account, this class account, at the same time I want to have another class for user there. So this user now is going to have some reusable component or some method or some properties that is coming from this account that we want to reuse inside this second class here. So how can we do it? One way of doing this stuff is by using composition. And what is composition? Is by you creating a variable or a member variable inside the user which is pointing to this account. For example, here we can just say that account is just going to be the new account here like this. But there is a better way of handling this thing. So instead of you instantiating this account inside the user, there's a better way that you can handle it by using what we call this inheritance. So which means this user now can inherit some properties or method from this particular account instead of us generating it directly like this. So this one too will work, but this is what we call composition here. This one is not inheritance. So we have inheritance and we have composition. But we don't want to use composition because you don't want to start managing the creating and destroying of this or class or the object that you are creating from it there. You want everything to be connected together there, and you can use inheritance. So, and how do you inherit properties or method from one class there? So to inherit a property from a class, you are going to use this keyword. So to inherit a property from a class, you are going to use the extend keyword. So you are going to use, let me comment out this one so that we can have it there. So this is what we call composition. So let me put a comment in front of it. So this is what is composition like this. So what you are doing here is known as composition, but we don't want to use composition. What we want to use is inheritance. So in order for you to inherit from a particular class there, you are going to use extend. So and what you are saying here is that, okay, I have this class that I want to create here, but this particular class is going to inherit or it's going to take some properties or method from this particular one that has been defined before. So everything that we have here that is not private, they are going to be visible to this user account, and the user account is going to have them as if we are typing it directly under the user. So for example here, I'm going to have a constructor which is going to create something for us later on. And from there, I'm going to create some variables here under it. For example, I'm just going to have the name, which is going to be testing or whatever the user pass later on to it, which I'm going to call testing by default. You don't pass anything to it. And here is going to be the name. So this account is having this single property here, which is name. And that same property that we have here, we are copying it into the user here. So we are copying it into the user here. And at the same time too, I can create another class again, for example, like the admin of the site. But this admin too, we have their own name. So this one too is going to extend account. And what we are doing here is that instead of us doing copy and paste of this same functionality into user and admin, we have it in this particular class, and every other class can now inherit this property or methods that you want to have inside the class there. So for example, here we can have a print name, which is going to be a method. And what is the method going to do? What it's just going to do is just to console log out the name, which I'm going to add some text to it. My name is this, and it's going to print out the name. For this property that we have here, assuming we want to do the same thing here and here without inheriting it from this account, what we have to do is to copy this entire code into this user and into the admin. But with the help of inheritance now, we can inherit properties or methods from one class into another class there. So here now, user is inheriting property from account. Admin too is inheriting property from the account there. And each one of them can add extra property that you want to add into this one. For example, now for the user, we might need to have their balance. Maybe their balance is 0 by default, but not to concern the admin class with that. Admin is going to have something like maybe like salary, or maybe like the position and so forth like that. So this one is going to be admin like this. So just say. So what is going on here? What we are doing here is that one class is inheriting property from another class. Yes, let me comment out this one so that it doesn't give the error, because we already have a class before with this user. So here now we have this account which have this property name and it have this method print name. But the same functionality that we have inside this account, we want to use it inside user, and at the same time want to use inside admin. So the way you are going to do it with normal class is to have the copy of this in. So if you are not inheriting, the way you are going to do it is to put everything directly like this. Again, you are going to do the same thing for this particular user. And as you can see right now, we are repeating ourselves. So we are repeating what we want to do here and here. And both of them are actually the same. So why do we need to repeat ourselves? One way of doing this thing is to move out all those things that related to each other there that you are going to be using for different class, and put it inside its own class. Then any other classes that need those functionality can now inherit from it, just like the family, where you inherit the house or any other properties that is part of that family there. So here too, you can have a class, and that class you can inherit any properties from it or method if they are not private. So you can only inherit if they are not private there. If it is private, that means this is only useful inside the class where it is defined. So you can inherit property that are private. For every other thing that are not private, then you can inherit it there. And how do you inherit your property without you repeating yourself like this? What do you do? What you do is to use the extend keyword and followed by the name of the class that you want to inherit from. So here now, the user is inheriting properties and methods from this account. Don't forget, what is going to be inherited there is the public one there. So here too, this our admin is inheriting property from account. And now we can create the object that we want from the user. For example, here our user is going to be this new user there like that. And at the same time, this is going to cause error right now. It's going to cause error right now because that's something we need to do first. So in order for you not to cause error, let me just comment out this one for now. So let me just comment out this one for now. And what I will just do is just to use this name testing, because this one will jump to something I've not explained yet. So once we get there, I will come back into this one. So now we have this user, and at the same time, I'm going to have my first admin, which is going to be new admin. And we can console log out all these. Say, for example, console log out the admin, and at the top here too, we can console log out the user. And once this thing is on the screen, you see that the user have access to balance and it have access to name. The same thing too, the admin now have access to name and it have access to the position that is defined inside it there. And again too, each one of them can use the method that we define. For example here, admin then dot print name. But we did not define this print name under the admin. How is it possible? It's because we are extending the account. And whatever that we have inside the account, this one is going to have its own copy of it. Again too, the user too, we have its own copy. They are not affecting each other. Right now, it will be printing out the same details, but once we started using our constructor there, you see that they will have their own separate details, because right now it's just the same value and you can't just change it like that. It's something you can change, but I don't want to change it right now. And if I save it now, you see that admin is going to print out my name is testing. The same thing too, user can do its own too by just saying user then dot print name. They will have access because they are inheriting this property from, or they are inheriting this method from the account. So when you have multiple classes and you know some of these classes now, they need some features that are going to be repeated inside all these classes. What do? You extract them out and you create what we call a base class, and that base class, other classes can now go there and inherit anything that they want from it. So this account now, what we normally call it is going to be this base or parent class. So this is the name you always hear people calling it, depending on the language that you are using there. But it can be called base or it can be called parent class because other classes are inheriting from it. While all these ones that we have here are called the child or derived. So they are called the derived or the child class. So they are class too, but they are either called this derived or the child class. So this class user is derived or is a child class because it's inheriting from here, and at the same time too, our admin is a child or a derived class of this account. So this is a derived class, while this is a parent because this one is not extending any other class there. And again too, this thing can go more than this. So if you have maybe like this type of user now, you want to have a premium user, and it's going to have some property about this user too. You can actually inherit from here too. For example, here you can have a premium user like this, and this one now is going to extend. Then what is it extending? Is extending user, and here we are going to have a property is a premium like this, which is going to be true there because this user doesn't have some property that the premium user is going to have. This one now, what is going to happen with this premium user is that is inheriting property from user. So which means it's going to inherit this balance. But don't forget, user too is inheriting account, which means it has some property of account. So which means this premium one will be inheriting from user and at the same time is inheriting from account. So the premium user will have access to everything that is inside the account, and at the same time, it will have access to everything that is inside this one. So it will have access to the user and it will have access to the public property of this our account here like this. So which means our premium user can behave like a user, and at the same time it has this other property here that the normal user is not having there. So the normal user is having the balance. The premium user too, we have their own balance, which we can even set the balance to something. But right now I don't want to set it because I have not explained this particular stuff there. So the premium user is a user which have balance, and at the same time it have this is premium, which is set to true, and at the same time it's going to have name and this print name. Why? Because premium user is extending or inheriting properties from user. But don't forget, user too is inheriting property from here. So which means premium user is inheriting from user, and at the same time it's inheriting property from the account. And here now we can create our P user, which is the premium user, which is going to be new premium user there. And this is our premium user now. is going to have access to everything that the user have there, with the addition of that the other property that we add inside it there. So once this one is console logger now, as you can see, the premium user have access to balance, the new property we define inside it, and the property that is coming from the user, that is coming from the account. Why? Because the user is extending this one, and at the same time too, there this one is inheriting from user. So which means user, or this premium user, we have everything from user and the account there. And this is how you can create a class that inherits from one class to another. The class that you're inheriting from might be the one that is inheriting from another class too. What you need to know there is that any class that you're inheriting from there, the child class, we have access to everything that is inside it that is public, not private. Because anything that is private, you can just you can still use it, but for now, let's just assume that is always going to be public there, like that. And this one here is what we call the base or the parent class. Why this our user is a derived or child class of account, but is a parent to this premium. So this class premium now is a derived of this user. Why this user is parent to this premium user? Because we are extending or we are inheriting properties or method from it there, like that. And this is how you can inherit properties from another class. When you know that you have different classes, but there is some functionality there that are looking the same. So what do? You extract that functionality into its own class. Then those classes will now extend, or they are going to inherit the property from it, so that anytime you need to make changes, you only do it inside that base. And once the changes is made inside the base, wherever you are using it, the update is going to be there instantly. For example, here now, if I change the name from testing to Faatihat like this, it means any class that is inheriting from this account now, they are going to have the same thing, just like the way it is there. So if I bring this one back again, you see that all the name has changed. I don't need to start going into user or premium user or admin to make the changes. I will only do it inside the base class, because all of them, they are taking this property and it is common to them. So since it's common, we extract it out, and now we are now using it by extending those property in our derived or the child class there. So when you are working with multiple classes and you see that there are some properties or method that you are using that is related to each other, what do? You extract them out into their own class there. Then those classes that you want to work with will now be extending or inheriting those properties and method from that base class. And this thing is working right now, but it doesn't work like that, because there's some extra stuff that we need to do here when you define a constructor inside your base class. If you don't define a constructor in a base class, I mentioned it last time that JavaScript is going to create one for you, which is what it's using currently. But now we want to define our own base class here. I want to define our own constructor inside this base class. So there's going to be a problem now, because this constructor, as you can see, anytime it is called, so the base class, we are not defining our own constructor. So this constructor will get called anytime we are instantiating a class, or we are instantiating an object from this class. But if you look at where we are defining all this in, there is nowhere that we are instantiating object from this account. You can do it, it will work, but don't forget the user, the premium user, and this admin, they are inheriting property from it. And don't forget, there is no way you want to create this user that this account is not going to be created. The account will be created first before it is going to create the user. That's what JavaScript is going to do behind the scene. It will create everything that is inside this class first, then copy it into this user. But now that we've defined our own constructor, it's not using the default constructor that the JavaScript is having there. So what is that going to happen when we try to create object now? For example, let me comment out all this one so that we're working with one object for now. And once this one is saved now, as you can see, this thing it's working. So we have this constructor here inside this base class, and inside the child class, as you can see, there is no constructor. JavaScript is going to create the default one. So now imagine that we now have constructor again, our own, inside the child one now. So we have the child one, and what I want to do here is just to console log at user constructor code like this. So user constructor code constructor. Don't forget what we have before is that there is no constructor inside this child one, and there is no constructor inside the parent one. Everything is working the way we're expecting it to work. So we get the user, we get our balance, and we get the name. But now we have the constructor inside the base. Again, there is no problem. Everything is working. Now let's add the constructor under the derived or the child class, and let us save. Can you now see now? There is not a problem. So when you define your own constructor inside the child, and the parent too is having constructor, you must call the parent constructor inside the child, and you have to pass everything that that parent is expecting from you. Right now, this is JavaScript. It will not complete if you don't pass anything. It will just pass undefined. You know that your function, if you don't pass the parameter, it will pass undefined. But you must call the constructor or the parent inside the child constructor anytime you are creating your own. Anytime you are creating your own constructor inside the derived class, you have to call the parent constructor. But you might be wondering, how do we call the parent constructor? And that's what this thing is telling us here. In order for you to call the parent constructor inside the child constructor, you are going to call this super like this. If you want, you can actually use the name of the class, but this is a bad practice. You can do it like this too. It's going to work, but this is a bad practice there like that, because what if this name change? So what if the name change? You start looking for all the name. So instead of you doing that, you can use this special keyword or this special method again. This is another special function or method that is given to us by JavaScript. And what is this thing going to do? What it's going to do is that it's going to make sure that the constructor of this extended or this base class is called before constructing the child constructor there. So before the child constructor is going to get called, or inside the child constructor, is going to make sure that the parent one is set up properly first before doing everything that we have inside the child. The only time you'll be doing this is when you define a constructor, when you are not using the default one that the JavaScript is using there. If you are using the default one that the JavaScript is using, it's going to do all this magic behind the scene for you. Since it's using its own constructor, there won't be any problem. But once you started defining your own constructor there, you need to call the parent constructor that, oh, constructor of this parent, oh, I want you to initialize everything inside you before you do my own side there. And as you can see right now, it will not work because we are defining our own constructor inside the child. And since the parent constructor needs to be called there, so you need to do it manually yourself. If you are using the JavaScript constructor, the default one, it will do it for you explicitly. But if you are creating your own constructor like this, then you have to call the parent constructor there. And what is the parent constructor that I want to call here? Is going to be this one. And if you look at the parent constructor, as you can see, it's expecting name. So which means here we need to send something down into it if you want. Because if you don't send it, it's still going to work. And as you can see, it will be using the default value there like that. But that's not what I want. I don't want it to be using default value. I want to be able to pass the details that the constructor is expecting. So whatever the details that the constructor is expecting, you can pass it inside the super. Super is just going to create this constructor or class for you behind the scene. And whatever you pass into it is going to pass it to the constructor of the base or the parent class. So here, what is the stuff expecting? It's expecting name from us. And here too, we can just pass the name. For example, here it's just going to be raster like this. And once it's saved, anytime you create object from the class, as you can see, the name now is going to be whatever you pass to the constructor. So the super is what you always call inside your constructor anytime you define your own constructor for the derived class. If you don't define it, the super is going to get called behind the scene for you. But once you define your own constructor, then you must call the super of the, or you must call the constructor of the base class. And how do you call the constructor? You use this special function or method that is given to us there, and inside it you pass all the necessary information that the constructor of the base class is going to use there. So everything that is expecting from you, you pass them. If you don't pass it, it will just pass undefined for everything that this thing is expecting there. So it's always good that you pass it there. But I don't want to pass the details too directly like this. I want to be able to pass it anytime the user is called too. So yeah, instead of us doing like this, we can actually receive the data from the constructor of the user. So here we want to receive the, I'm calling it username like this, and whatever you pass as the username to the constructor of the user, we are sending it down to the constructor of the account that we are deriving from. So anytime this user is called, it's expecting a username, but that username that you are passing is sending it down to the constructor of our base class. And what is that? It's just this name. Like, you can call this name or any other thing, but here, anytime we are defining our class now, or anytime we are creating objects from it, then we need to pass the details that we want. If you don't pass it, don't forget, it's going to use the default value, because this one will be undefined, and since it's undefined, it will send the undefined down. And since it's undefined here, to look at it, it will use the default value that we are setting there like that. And once this thing is saved, everything will go back to testing. But now I can send the details that I want to it, for example, like Faatihat, and once it's saved, you see that the user now is going to have the details that we send out. And this is how you can send the information that the base class is expecting from the constructor there. So anytime you define a constructor inside the derived class, you have to call this super to initialize the constructor, or to call the constructor of this base class. And whatever the base class is expecting from you, you can send it down to the super, and super will forward it to the constructor of that base or the parent class, and everything is going to initialize for you there, and you can start using it the normal way you expect it to work like that. So the same thing here too. Once we call the admin too, so let me remove this one, and let's instantiate object from this admin. And as you can see here too, we show, where's my lesson? So here I have, yeah, so I've not defined any constructor yet. I'm using default one. So let me define constructor here too. And what's the constructor of this one looking for? It's expecting position like this, and it's expecting the name of the account there. And what do we want to do? Don't forget, the property position is already on this account, so we can just set it just like the way we normally do the normal one. And again, we are calling our super, but I always love to call super first before initializing the one for the child one. So always call the super first, so that it will initialize everything that is inside that base class. Then you can start doing the one that you have inside the derived class. So here now, anytime we call this admin, or anytime we are creating objects from this admin, we are going to receive position and the name. The position you are giving to us, we set it, and if you don't give it to us, as you can see, it's going to be admin, or it's going to be set to undefined, because if you don't pass anything, it will update it to undefined there. And the super now, we are setting the name, or we are sending down this name, so that it can initialize this our name that is under it. And anytime we call this print name later on, the name is now going to be whatever we send as the name to this. And if I save this one too, we should have error again. Where is it? Have I defined anything here? Okay, I've already called my super, so there isn't any error. But if I don't call the super, that's where the error is going to come outside there, because you've defined your own constructor. So JavaScript is not going to call the base again. So you have to be the one that will call the base. And to call the base class, or to instantiate the base class, you need to call the super. If you need to pass any information to it, just pass it under the super. But if you don't need to pass any information, just leave it empty. In the constructor of the super class, or what I call super here, it's just this one here, or the base. So this is another name, or you can call it super, but I'll be calling it base. So this base class, if it's not expecting anything from you, just call super directly. But we know that it is actually expecting something from us, which is the name of the user, and we are sending it down. And as you can see here, I'm not passing any of this information. That's why this name is still testing, and now the position is undefined, because we did not pass the position. Don't forget, here we are setting it, And since we are not passing in, it will be undefined. But if it's not set, I want this thing to be admin by default like this. So which means if the user did not send it, I still want it to maintain this admin tag. But I actually want to send it down. So here we need to send the position. The position here is going to be let me just say the coordinator. So the position is going to be coordinator, while the name is going to be raster like this. And once you save, you see that it's going to send down the position. It's going to send down the position to this one, while the name will be sent down into this our account because it's our derived or our base class. And this one too is going to initialize the necessary stuff. Where is it? It's going to initialize the necessary stuff that it needs to do. And from there now, inside this our admin, we have access to the name, we have access to position, and we have access to this print name. The same thing to user, we have access to his own name, and it will have access to his own print name there. And once this thing is logged out and admin print name, you'll see that everything is still working the way we have it before. So my name is raster. So if the user too call its own, you're going to say that it's going to print my name is Faatihat because that's the name that we are sending down to it. And we can do the same thing too from this premium user. Don't forget the premium user, it's extended from user. So, and if you look at the constructor here, that one is only expecting the username. So here too, we can create our own constructor instead of relying on the JavaScript one there like that. And anytime this thing is called, so we are calling our super, and what we want to send under the super, we are just putting premium like this as the name that we want to use. So the name that we pass here will be sent down to this constructor. Then that name too will be sent down to this super, which is this account. And that one now, we now initialize everything. And now premium user, we have access to this. It will have access to balance. It will have access to print name. And it will have access to name based on whatever you send down to it. And once we have this now, and here too, we can just call this our p user, and at the same time we can use the p user then dot print name because all of them, they are extending from the same class. And as you can see here, for the premium user, the name is going to be premium. His premium is true, and it has access to balance because it's inheriting from the user there. Since we have these details under it, then it's working, and we have access to the details that is coming from the user and from the account there. And each one of them can do all the necessary stuff that's related to them because it's premium. There is nothing concerning the user with that because they are not premium user, they are just normal user. The same thing too for the admin, even though you have name, but that doesn't mean that you have balance because nothing concerns you about balance. You are not doing anything related to balance. The only thing you need is the admin and some other administrative tasks that is related to the admin here. And this inheritance make it possible for us to be able to have access to some property from one class there, or from one or two classes, depending on how you want this thing to be. Because if you look at this premium user now, it's not just inheriting from user, it's inheriting from account too. So this one is inheriting from two classes. You can't do it on one line, it has to be like this. So from account to user, then from user to premium. Not that from premium directly to user and account. No, it's not possible in JavaScript. But there's some languages there that allows you to inherit from user and account at the same time. But in JavaScript, you cannot do it like that. You can only inherit, as you can see, you can only inherit a single class. You can't inherit multiple classes. But there are some languages that allows you to do this there. But here, you can't do that. You have to do it in a form of a tree like this, where you start from the top one, move to the second, and from the second, you move to the third one. If there's any other classes that want to inherit from premium, then it has to happen on another line. So this one, you can't just have one class inheriting from multiple classes directly on one line. You can't just extend multiple classes. You have to do it in this way, where you are inheriting from one class and that class too inheriting from another class there like that. And this thing is very important when you are working with a system that is well defined. When you are working with a system that is well defined, it's always good that you go with class because you have all the blueprint that you need. For example, now maybe you have a site for your the online tutorial there, and you want to have this thing in a system where you have the details like the staff, you have the administrator, and at the same time you have the students that registering there. So from there now you can create the classes that have all the related features for particular student. Again too, you have a class that have everything that is meant for our staff, and at the same time you have the class that is managing everything related to the administrator of the site there. But don't forget there's some property that is going to be under staff, and at the same time it's going to be under admin, and at the same time it's going to be under the user. So all those ones can now be extracted out, and then all those classes like the admin, the staff, and student can now extend those information instead of you repeating yourself by doing copy and paste that we have been running from right from the objects that take us to the class here like that. So it's really important that your class can inherit from the other one if the properties or methods are quite looking the same, or they are kind of doing some stuff in the same way. So instead of us now doing copy and paste, we can extract those details into their own class, and that class now we can inherit from it, and we modify it, because I can actually modify everything that is related to this user account, which is not going to affect the admin own because the details is public. So yeah, right now if I want, I can just change my user name now to anything. Before it is Faatihat, but right now I'm changing to any or I'm changing to James like this, and it's still going to work. And you are not changing anything related to admin, you're only changing the one that is related to user there. But you know that if you don't want this thing to be accessible to the user outside here, you need to make it private so that the user will not have access to it. As you can see, it started with Faatihat, then from there it moved to James because the property is public and we can modify it outside of the class. So anything that is public, you can modify it outside of the class. But if you want it, the user not to be able to change it, you just want to create interface that they can use to modify the details, then you need to make it private so that the user outside of the class will not be modifying the details later on there like that. And what brought us now into what we call this polymorphism. So in JavaScript or in JavaScript class, we use polymorphism there. We use polymorphism there to achieve or is a way of you align your method of your class to behave in a different way based on where it's being called. So when you are talking about polymorphism, this allows you to create a method from a derived class, and that derived or they create a method from the base class, and the derived class can modify some of the functionality of this your method that is coming from the base class. Right now we have this print name under this base class here, and all the derived class, they are inheriting this property, and as you can see, each one of them are printing the same thing again and again in the same way. But I want my admin to be able to use the same print name but in a different way. So we want this our admin to still be able to use this print name, but it should behave in a different way when it's being called under the admin. And that same stuff too is still going to be used under the user, but it's going to have its own way of working under the user. And that's where the polymorphism comes in, because poly means many. So the same method can behave differently based on where it's being called. And we achieve this thing in the JavaScript class by using what we call method overriding. So let me put this in the HTML there. So when you want to achieve this thing in JavaScript, we use something known as so it's used something known as this overriding, but it's known as method overriding. And what does method overriding mean? What this means is that your base class is going to have a method, but that method inside the base class, derived class can override it. So the way the method is going to work under the base, inside the derived, they can modify that behavior. Right now, under the base, this is what is printing out, or this is what is doing. But under this derived now, we can modify the way this print name is going to behave under the user. I can modify it the way it's going to work under the premium user, and at the same time too, I can modify it to behave differently under this admin when it is called from admin. When it is called from user, it's going to do something else. When it is called from admin, it's going to do another thing entirely. And at the same time too, you can still do what is happening under this parent one, and that thing is known as a method overriding. So which means the base class method can be override inside the derived class. Right now we have print name under this base class, so that same method here, you can override it under the derived one. And how do you override it? Just have the same name that the parent is using for that method. So whatever name that the parent is using, it can happen to this to your property too. But what's that advantage there when you are just renaming everything directly there? So we don't do it with property, but it will work too with property. But majorly you only see it with method, because you want this your method to be able to do something else and it still be able to do what is coming from its base class there. So, and in order for you to be able to override any of the method of the base class, you need to define the same name inside the derived class. And now your method here can do something else under the user. Currently, this is what it's going to do when it's called under the account, or when it is called under premium user, or when it's called under admin, because this one is inherited from user, so it will take the one under the user there. And what do we want to do? What we just want to do is that username is, so currently what we have is that this thing is going to print my name is this name, but now we are overriding that method under the user. So anytime we call the user.print name, it's not going to do whatever that is coming from a base class again. It's now going to be overridden by the one we have under this particular user here. And once this thing is saved and load on the page, you see that once the user is called now, what we are going to get is that the username now is what we are getting, because the premium is actually coming from user, and whatever that happened to the user is going to happen to the premium. But I don't want to call the premium right now. Let me be working with user directly. So this is the user here, and we want to console log out the user there. So we have this new user, and I want to console log out the stuff. And once this thing is called now, can you see what we are getting is username? But when this thing is called from the admin, you are still having that details, and this is what we call polymorphism here. So this thing can behave in different ways based on where it's being called or how it's being called. And in JavaScript, we achieve polymorphism through this method overriding. You can override any method or property that is coming from a base class. Once you define the same name inside the child one, it will override the one that is coming from the parent. It will override. Override doesn't mean it's removing that parent one. It's to still be there, just that it will not call the parent one, it will be calling the child version of that method. But if you still need access to the one that is coming from the base one, you can still have access to it. How do you have access to the parent one? You can use this super here. And on the super, as you can see here, I have access to this print name. So if I want to use the one that is coming from the parent, if I still need access to the one that is coming from the parent, the super will give you access to the base class here. Look at it, we are using it here as a constructor. So here now, we are using it as object. So this super now is going to be whatever object that is created for this account that is under the user. And that one now, you can have access to everything that's inside it. So what we are doing here, we are overriding whatever print name used to do under the account, under this particular user. But if you still need access to some of this method that is coming from the base one that you've overridden, like that has been overridden, you can call them by calling this super. And here now, what is it going to do? What this is going to do is that it will firstly perform the one that is coming from the super, which is a base class, which is this account, and it's still going to do the one that I have here. But we have already overwritten everything that is here. We've override this particular method here. But in order for you to have access to it, or whatever that is coming from the parent, just call the super. Because if you have the same name, for example, like this name here now, so if you call name, it will be giving you the one that is inside user. It will not give you the one that is coming from here again. But what if you need the one that is coming from that base class? Just call your super, and on the super, you use the dot to access anything that is coming from the parent in case the name is clashing there like that. But most of the time, you always use this method, you always use polymorphism for method, not for the member variable, because when you started doing it like this, it means that thing you can actually put it directly under the user, just like this balance. There's no need of us putting balance under the account because the other user don't need it. The only person that need it is this class, or the only one that need it is this class. So why do we need to put it here and start modifying it here? No, we don't need to do that. Other classes don't need the balance. So the same thing too for this premium. Other classes don't need this one. So we need to just put them, or we need to just put it under this premium user. But you still have access to everything that is coming from the user and everything that is coming from this account. And this will really make it possible to share information between classes here that are related to each other. And what I mean by sharing information, that doesn't mean that the user now can modify what is inside the admin. No, what they are doing there is that they are sharing the information that are common to them, but they are still going to be a separate copy. So the admin is going to have name, and at the same time user will have name, premium user too will have name, but there are still some functionality that is inside premium user that we don't have under the normal user. Again, there are some functionality that we have under the admin that the normal user and the premium user don't have access to, like the position. None of them add position because nothing concerns about position or managing of account. Their job is to do something else, but there is something that is common to all of them. So instead of you repeating yourself, you can extract those functionality out and you create a base class for that. But at some time too, some of the methods you have inside that base class, you need that method to behave in a different way under a particular class. So you can override it by using what we call method overriding. And how do you override method? Just define the same name that you have inside that base class inside the derive there, and it's going to override it. And what is it going to do? It will not give you anything that is coming from this account again related to that function or method. It will always be giving you the one that is under the class where you're mentioning. But what if you need access to the one that is coming from the base? If you still need access, like you still need to do some stuff right there, but you just need to add some functionality to it, then here now you can call the one that is coming from the from it there, and you can add some other functionality. For example, here this is coming from user like this. So this is coming from user like this. So save. So when you call print name on this user, it's going to firstly perform this action that is coming from the super there, and at the same time it will going to add some other necessary information I want to do. But doing the same with admin, as you can see, the only thing we get here is just my name is Rasta, because that one is still inheriting the print name from the base class, and we did not override it. Here too, you can override it by just define the same name again, and once you define it, it will hide the one that is coming from the parent, and it will always do the one that we have there. And we still want to have access to the one that's coming from the parent, you call the super, then on the super you use the dot to have access to any information that you want to take from the parent or the same name there. So this one now we have access to the one that's coming from the parent, and from there we can now console log out the stuff. But I want this one to come first so that we see that it is actually different. So when you are dealing with user, it will call the one that is coming from the base, then it will perform the action from the derived one. But for this one, it's doing the derived first before calling the parent one. And what we are doing here is known as method overriding. We can still do what is coming from the parent, but we are adding some extra functionality that is only meant for this class there. Again, the same thing here too is going to do the same thing, because now this premium user, we have access to everything that is coming from the user. And once this one is called now, it will be doing the same way that we have it under the user, because it's relating the user, and the user have all this functionality, so it will have everything. I don't need to do too much under the premium because everything that it needs is already under the user. We just want to add this is premium and some other functionality that the normal user doesn't have. Just like all this subscription that you have online, that when you subscribe, there's a lot of things you are going to see on the UI that the normal user will not see, because they are having a set of properties that the normal user did not have. But if you go to YouTube now, for example, like my YouTube account, I have a premium account there, like with YouTube. You see that there's a lot of things that is going to show that the normal user will not have there. For example, clicking on this YouTube, both of us, the logo is different from the normal user because this is know that I'm a premium user, and since I'm a premium user, the way the logo is going to show will be different. There's some menu here, or the way some video are going to show for you is going to be different because me, there's nothing like ads there. So none of my video will show that there's an ad here because I'm using premium. But now if I try the same thing with the normal user or the user that is not even sign up by going to this Ignito mode, you see that we are going to have a separate URL. Even though this account or whatever account you use to log in, we still have some detail like the username, you have password, and everything like that. All of them are still user, but there is some other feature that the premium user have that the normal user does not have. And as you can see now, the logo is different because it's seeing it like a normal user account, but yeah, this one is seeing it like our premium account that has this property that the normal user did not have. And you can create a class to kind of model the real example that I'm really talking about there. And again too, for the normal user, if you go there, this thing I want to play for some time, you see that you will be seeing some ads or some advertisement there. But for my own, since I'm a premium user, there is no ad. I can watch anything any day. And again too, whenever I stopped, I can continue from any of my devices that is connected to the account. So there is no saying like pause and they would show advert for me. The thing will start instantly and I'll watch everything that I do. And if I close it here now and open it on my phone, this thing will show me that I've started playing this, I should continue on phone. Or if I start something on the phone, it will tell me that okay, I can actually continue from where I stop from that particular stuff there, because there is a particular user that is a special user which is different from the normal user, just like the way we have this our class user, but this user we are inheriting from it, which is going to be this premium user here, which have some other properties that the normal user did not have, and so forth like that. So this is how this thing works, and we can use it to model some of our stuff that we're going to be doing later on there like that. And lastly, what is time? Let me check the time. And lastly, before we call it a day, I want to talk about this static variable or method here. So when you are talking about the static variables or member variable or this method, these are variable or method that only exists on class, not on the instance. So the variable that are static, they are really useful when you want to have some functionality on the class rather than the instance of the class. So what is instance? Don't forget, everything that we are creating under this class here now, they are just blueprints. They have not been created yet. The time they are going to be created is when you are creating instance or when you are creating objects from them. The only time all these things will start creating or if they will start working, if you look at it right now, once I disable all this code that is creating all these objects, you see that nothing will show on the screen again. Nothing will show on the screen again. Even if you go to the constructor here and you just print out something, for example, console log testing, nothing will show because they are not going to be there until you start creating the object from them. So the only time they will start working on the JavaScript is going to allocate them is when you've started creating object from that your class. But there's some methods or some of these properties that you want to have for your class that are not related to any object that you are creating from it, but it's only for a particular class. And all these things are kind of useful anytime you want to bootstrap your class or you want to create a method on your class that can generate a class for you. So instead of you using this new keyword directly like this, I can actually create something like this by saying user then dot create, so create account like this. So this account now will just supply the details of the user that I want to create. For example here, I just want it to create this one. Or on the class, I want to have something like this, user then dot create account. So this one now is not going to create one account, it's going to create multiple account like this. You can see some of this functionality now. You've not created a class, but we are using them directly on that class. So this kind of a method here are what we call static method. So any method in this way are what we call static method. So you don't need to use new before you can call them on your class. And again, they are not meant for your instance, which means whatever object that you create from your class, they are not going to have access to all this information. They will only be available on the class. And as you can see, they are only useful anytime you want to bootstrap your class or you want to do something that is not related to instance on that class. Anytime you want to do anything that is not related to instance, then you can use the static method or the static variable there. And those static variable too, they are something you can just access on your user. So this is going to be a variable like this. And this variable, it only exists on your class. You can't see it on the method or on the instance that you are creating from that your class. So here now, just like what I have here, I want to have a method on my class that can create objects for me directly. So instead of me using new, I can just quickly do like this by just say my user one is just going to be user.create account. You can think of this one now as a method, as a boost that can bootstrap your class. What is it going to do? It's just going to do the same line here. That's what it's just going to do. But this one is more useful. So instead of me going to different line to create the user, I can just supply the name. And behind the scene, this one is going to create all the objects for each one of them out of this class. So here now, we can now, so this one is going to be my user2 like this. So user2, which I'm using what we talked about before. This is going to be user3, because don't forget it's going to return back object. And that object is going to be an array. So the first one that is generating here will go to this user2. The next one will go to user3 because I already have user1 here. And this is the advantage, or this is the usefulness of static variable or method here. They are useful anytime you need to bootstrap your object from the class, or anytime you want to have some functionality that on the object, not to the instance. Because this create account now, it will never be available on any of the objects or the instance that you are creating from your class. But this method, or this method here now, we want it to only be available on the user, so that we can use it to just create multiple users at the same time, instead of us doing it. The same thing that this thing is doing here, if you want to do it on a separate line without using this stuff, what we have to do is to do const user 3 like this. So it's going to be something like this. So user 3 like this, or 2 new user. So we supply the name, which is going to be Faatihat like this, and again user 3. So the same thing we are doing on this line, where we are calling this method to generate it for us, we are doing it by ourselves on this line. Now imagine that you have like 10 or 3. So this one will make it easier, like to quickly bootstrap the stuff, and it will return all the objects that you are creating from that class at once for you, instead of you doing it yourself. And we can use this method here. And how do you define static method under your class? So to define static method under the class, what do? You define it like your normal function, but the difference between the normal method here is that here we are going to have this keyword static. So this is what is going to turn this method now to a static method. So this method will not be available on any instance that you are going to be having there. So any instance you are going to be having later on, they are not going to be available. It will only be available on the class that you have there, and you can only call it on the class. You can't call it on the object that you are creating from the class. For example, here now, this particular class now that we are creating from the user, to expand it like this. Can you see? There is nothing like create account there. It will never be available. You will not see it there. But if I remove this static from it, if I remove the static and just do it like this, and if you go to this prototype now, as you can see, we're going to have access to this create account there like that. But I don't want this thing to be available on my user directly like that. So you know that, can you see now? So the only thing we have access to now is print name. You will never see it there, because it's only available on the class itself, not on the instance that you are creating from the class. So anytime you define a static, you can only call it on the class. You can't call it on the instance. So you can't just come here and say user then dot create So you can't do something like this. It will not work because it's not there. So it will not work if you call it. Can you say create account is not a function? Even though we have it under the user, but it's telling us that it's not a function because it is static. And once it's static, it's only this class that can call it. Any instance that you create from that class cannot call it. And when is it useful? Just like what I mentioned down here, it's useful anytime you just want to quickly bootstrap your class from it. And what do we want to do here? What we just want to do is to combine what we've learned before together, and it will do some stuff from us, because here now we know that we're going to receive the users. So whatever user that you send to us, what are we doing? What we just want to do here is to just return user like this. So user, map it and create a new instance for us. And once it's done creating a new instance, we return the array back. Don't forget here, down here, we are receiving it as array. So I'm receiving it as array, and that's the reason why I'm destructuring it here, because I know that I'm sending two things. So for the first one, it will take it here. The second one, it will put it here. Or instead of me doing it like this, I can just console log it out directly, like that. So let me just console log it out directly. So come down here, so console log out, and here we are passing it here. So we have this user, which is calling this static method, and this static method will help us to create all the user that we send down into it. So every user that we send down into it, then it's going to help us to create it. Another thing we can use static method for is to compare two objects that is coming from a particular class, whether that a particular variable, or when you want to do something like this, maybe you have under this user you have age, and you want to compare whether one user age is greater than the other user age there. Here you can actually create a static method by saying is age or is premium or anything, and as you can see here, it's going to check whether the user is having premium or not, like this. So but this thing here now, you can't call it on any of the instance of this class. You have to call it directly like this. So what we can do here is just to CLG like this. What I can do is to just say user is premium, and you pass whatever user you want, and here now it will either return true or false whether the user is premium or not, like that. But if I do the same thing now for this p user, then this one should kind of return back to reference. Oh, I've disabled this p user. Okay, let me bring my p user back, and once this is, can you see now? So for the p user is returning true. So on this stuff, we are creating this static method, and the static method, it will receive whatever user you send down to it, and once you receive the user, it will check whether that user have the information you are looking for or not. All the same thing that we are doing on this line here, that we are bootstrapping a class. So with this static method now, we are able to create two users at once on one line. Just pass the details and it's going to generate the stuff for you. But all these static methods, you can only call them on the class. They are only useful when you want to create a particular stuff, or when you want to create a method that is not related to any instance, or is not particular to a particular instance there, or is not meant for a particular instance. Because this print name now, each copy that you are creating from this class now is going to have their own copy of print name. So this user here is going to have his own copy of print name, while this user second one for the raster is going to have his own copy of print name. But when you're talking about static method is not related to any instance, is only belonging to their particular class. And majorly where you'll be using them is when you want to create, or you want to bootstrap your class, or you want to check whether a particular class instance is having this method or not. But you don't want this function to be outside of the class. You don't want the function to be outside of the class. You still want it to be part of the class, but it's not related to any instance. Then you are going to make it static, because it will only be called on the class that define it, not on the object that you are creating from that class. None of the objects you are creating from that class we have access to. This is premium. It's only class that define it that we have access to it. Just like what we have here, where we have is premium, to check whether a particular user is premium or not. But I don't want to have this function outside of this class. So I still want to put it inside this place, but I don't want it to be instance. So I don't want it to be a function or a method that is bound to the instance that you are creating from the class. I always want it to be separate. But what does it need? You just need to send the user to me, and on that user I will check whether it's premium or not, like that. And if it is premium, it will bring it up. If it's not premium, then it will show something else. And as you can see here, it's returning undefined for the first one because it doesn't exist under the user. But I can convert it to Boolean by putting this one here, so that I always either get this true or false there. And as you can see, for the first one, it is false because I know that that user now did not have that property. But for the second one, it has that property, and that's the reason why we are getting the true like this. So this is how this will work. Static variable, the same thing too, you can have variable if you want. So you can have variable, we can define it as static. For example, here we want to have static and it's going to be this. But the problem with this one too is that you don't have access to it under the instance. So let me move it under the user too, so that we can have it there on the screen. So any static variable that you define, you won't have access to it too under that user instance. So as you can see here, the only thing we have access to is balance and name. There is nothing like this variable. But assuming this thing is not static, you say that it is going to be there. Yeah, now we have variable as part of the data that is inside that instance. But once it's static, it's not available on the instance. It's only available on the class. And you can actually use this thing now to know the number of variable, or to know the number of classes, or to know the number of object that was created from these classes, because it's always available on the user. And anytime the stuff is created, we can actually increase it. But there's a problem with this thing. The problem is that any variable that you declare as static, you can only call them under static. You can't call it under this one because you know that it's not available. So if you call it under this one, it will give error. So where you can call your static is the class that owns it, or any method that is declared as static. Any method that is declared as static, we have access to this variable, but any other method here don't have access to it. So you can only use the static variable under the static method or the class that define it. If you try to use it under any other method that is inside the class that are not static, it's going to give you error like that, because that thing doesn't that thing is not available at all. It's not available. So if you just do this like this, it's not available because this thing is not part of the instance that will be created. And as you can see here on the screen, the only thing we have access to is balance and the name. We don't have access to that variable. So if you try to call it under this print name, then it will not work. So it will not work at all like that. So the only way you can have access to it, as you can see here, is printing out undefined, because it's not part of it there. So the only way you can have access to it is just to use this your user like this. And once you call the user like this, then it will have access, because it's actually coming from the class. It's only the class that can have access to it. And as you can see, we have the value like that. So you can only call it from the class. You can only call it from the class. We can this is going to be static variable like this. So save, and as you can see, that's the only time you are going to have access to it. You can't just come here and say this. You just say this, it will not work because it's not available on the instance. It's only available on the class. So for you to have access to it, you have to use the class to call it, just like the way we are using class to call any of the static methods. So here too, you can call it outside. For example, user variable like this, and it's still going to work because it's available on the class, not on the instance. If you try to use anything that is related to instance to have access to it, you are not going to get it at all. So it only works when you call it through the class and define it there like that. And where I'm going to stop for now. I'm going to be showing some sample in the next class by us creating a class for profile. We're going to create a class for staff. We're going to create a class for students. What we want to do is to mimic university system there. So we want to mimic university system, which is uni learning, where we're going to have the profile, students, staff. Again, we are going to have administrator, and we are going to see how each one of them are taking, or how they are inheriting from property from each other there, and we are going to use them. And after that, we talk about the set map, error handling there, because all this one I have to treat them in the next class. And after the next class, the one that will be following it, we're going to be talking about coring in JavaScript. So we're going to be talking about coring, because this thing is very important. It's something you always use a lot. There are some places that there's some code in your JavaScript or in your React application that you don't even need to do a lot of typing there when you're using this coring there. For example, when you're passing your function into all these on click and some other things, you see that there's some places you need to pass parameter into your function. What do? You create arrow function, and inside the arrow function, that's where you now do the stuff. But you should be able to do the stuff like by just passing the stuff, because some of the function that you want to pass the data to, you are not the one that will call it. Is that event that is going to be called later on. For example, like this, I'm going to have this document, then add event listener. So, and what happened? So anytime this thing is clicked, anytime the event or this document is clicked anywhere on the screen, anytime it is clicked, if you look at it here now, I just want to call something. I want to call a function. But the function I want to call, you have to pass the name of the function here. But this name that you, or this function that you want to call, for example, this func that I want to call, this func here, I need to supply some parameter to it too. Like it needs to have some parameter first. Then that function that is now inside it will now be doing the magic that I want and couple with whatever I pass it. But this thing looks like, it looks, what I'm trying to say right now, it looks somehow. But once we talk about this coring in JS, you are going to understand what I'm talking about it. So this function now that I have here is going to return another function, and the function that is now returning here will be the one that will actually receive the event. So again, this one too, it will receive some stuff, maybe user like this. So whatever user you send to me, we know that this user we are dealing with. But where we want to send it to, you cannot call the function, but you want to pass the user to it. How do you do it? So you need to use what we call coring here. If you don't want to use coring, one way of using it is just by creating the function right there. But I want to make the function to be usable in different places, and I can send different users. So here now, whatever user you pass to it, this inner function, we have access to it. So here I can have access to the user. For example, here my user like this is, so it is going to be user, and at the same time the event. So here CLG, the event is going to be like this. So now this my func, I can now call it, pass the user. The user is going to be raster like this. So once I pass this stuff, save, go to the screen. Now anytime it's called, I will have access to the user that was passed, and at the same time, as you can see, my user is raster, and at the same time I have access to the event. But in a normal sense, whatever function you want to pass to this add event listener here, you must not call it. You only pass the name. But because I want to be able to pass, so I need to do some stuff like this. And what I'm doing here is part of what we call closure and coring and so forth like that. So that's where this in. But we're going to be talking about this in this. So coring, yeah. So you always use it a lot when you need to do some stuff instead of you passing, because there are some places you cannot pass parameter, just like what I just demonstrated here. When you want to call this in, if it's not coring, you can only pass the name of the function. You can't just pass any parameter. If you pass the parameter, then you've already called it. And JavaScript or this add event listener will not be able to send the event later on, because you've passed something else and it has been called already. But the time I want it to be called is when something happens. So yeah, I need to be able to do a function that can return a function and all these things. So that's what we call coring, but we'll be talking more about it when we get to that class. So that's going to be all for today. Let me stop recording.